Hi, everybody. Today we are talking about how to make heads or tails of power of attorney, whether it's medical or financial, and how to understand the process of legal decision making if you are the agent under a power of attorney. Because people continue to ask about all the duties and the responsibilities of being a power of attorney and what to do if family members disagree. What types of decisions do agents under powers of attorney make? And what happens at end of life with power of attorney? So in this extremely detailed webinar, I'm going to discuss 3 topics. So if you're here, make sure you have the time to stay with me on this webinar, or bookmark the video and come back at another time when you have time. Also, share this video with anybody that you know who's looking for practical information and tips about the responsibilities of being an agent under power of attorney and what it's like if you're doing this for a loved one or a friend. I'm Pamela D Wilson. I am a caregiving expert and advocate of more than 20 years. I've been a medical and financial power of attorney. Please share this channel, follow my videos, click below, and please comment so that more people can find these webinars and videos on YouTube. Your participation, believe it or not, really does make a significant difference, not only for yourself, but for other people out there. So let's get started. The power that you have as an agent, we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the actions that can get you in trouble with family or the court system, and aspects of making life or death decisions. Now, these are topics, admittedly, right, that most people who agree to be a power of attorney rarely know about, unless you've done this before. Maybe this is your second or third time, or maybe you're actually a professional fiduciary. So stay with me so that you can learn all the important aspects of being an agent and why you really should take this responsibility very seriously, even the responsibility to consider agreeing to do this for someone, because it is a big responsibility. It's going to affect your life, whether you know it or not. Many individuals, especially adult children, who are appointed by a parent, sometimes believe that once they have this power, once they have this document, they can do anything they want. Well, that could not be further from the truth. As an agent for the principal, which is the legal name for the person who appointed you, as that agent, you have a duty to act. And I'm going to introduce 2 terms: in the best interest of a person, or you have to use substituted judgment. Now, understanding these terms can come in really handy if your motivations and your decisions are being questioned by people in your family or anybody else. Because as I talked initially, being an agent under power of attorney, it's a very serious responsibility that most people don't really understand. So if you have siblings or anybody questioning your intentions, if you're doing the right thing, or honestly, if you're wondering if you're doing things the right way, this webinar is going to be super helpful. We're also going to talk about what I call the brewing storm, which is the second topic. This is things that agents under a power of attorney do intentionally or unintentionally that get them into trouble. Most power of attorney abuse or glitches, they happen in families with adult children or other people who don't understand the responsibilities under agent of power of attorney, or they take these responsibilities a little too far and maybe they're misusing the money of a parent, or they're not providing adequate health care. It's really a sad situation, but honestly, it happens in a lot of families because of a lack of education or because the motives of the people who were appointed are not really in the right place. The troubling aspect of all of this is if you're a family member trying to prove power of attorney abuse, it can be very difficult if there was no oversight set up. So if you are the person who's appointing somebody to be your power of attorney, it might be a really good idea in that document to assign what I call a protector or somebody to provide oversight who's going to receive monthly or quarterly reports from the financial power of attorney and the healthcare power of attorney so that they can make sure that everything is above board and really being done in your best interest for your best good. The third thing that we're going to talk about is aspects of making end or life decisions, including what being an advocate means. And I'll share a few stories from my days as agent under power of attorney with real clients. And then last, we're going to finish up with the definition of what reasonable care means. So I'm reviewing all of this, even though this may be considered legal or technical terms that are confusing, because I want you to have the whole story that most attorneys who draft these documents really don't share with you if you don't ask. And I want you to know as much as possible as you can so you can do the best job that you can, so you can be the best power of attorney out there, whether you're appointed for your spouse or your parents or your grandparents or friends or somebody else. So to summarize, 3 things: best interest and substituted judgment, the brewing storm, things that can really get agents under power of attorney in a lot of trouble, and the advocacy and responsibilities for making decisions, including end-of-life decisions. These terms are really important because if you are in that agent, they represent your legal responsibility, your fiduciary responsibility to do the right thing. And as I mentioned, most attorneys don't talk to you about these day-to-day practicalities, all the things that you're going to have to do, because while they have the legal knowledge about like what's right and what's wrong, what they usually don't have is the day-to-day in the trenches, in the hospital, in the nursing home, talking to the doctors, dealing with disagreeable family members. They don't have that experience. It's only professionals like myself, individuals like myself, who have served as a power of attorney before, or a guardian or a conservator, who understand all the crazy things that can and will happen. It's similar to being a caregiver and having people from the outside looking in saying, well, how difficult can that be? Why are you so stressed out? And you're thinking, oh my gosh, you have no idea. Well, these people on the outside, without the experience, don't really understand all the stress and the anxiety. They cannot empathize with caregivers or agents under power of attorney because they go on with their lives and they're honestly just glad that somebody else has taken over all of this crazy responsibility. So it's difficult to find people to empathize with. They don't understand. It's not their fault. They've never done it before. Caregiving and serving as a power of attorney or a guardian or a conservator really is a different skill set that anyone can learn if you have an interest. So the reason that we're going to talk about the definitions of best interest and substituted judgment is that these topics may come up in discussions with attorneys. They may come up in your power of attorney situation. And I don't want you to be shocked if you're ever asked, well, are you doing what's in the best interest of your father? Are you using substituted judgment to decide what your mom would have wanted? Because there may be times, and most likely if there's memory loss or any type of Alzheimer's or any type of dementia, there are going to be times when your loved one can't evaluate information. They can't make decisions. And you as an agent have to do that. They rely on you for guidance and to make the right decisions. So what on earth is best interest? A lot of the definitions that I'm going to take are from the National Guardianship Association. It's a national association of which I am a member, and family members can join. So if you want more education, it's time consuming. I'm not going to be, not going to tell you it's not time consuming, but it's worth it if you really want to learn. And also if you're looking for a successor agent, successor guardian, the NGA is a great place to look. So the best interest standards mirror the view that the guardian's duties are similar to what a parent's duties would be for a child, right? So under this standard, the agent under power of attorney or a guardian, right, has to make independent decisions on behalf of this person and what would be just rightly for their good. And it's most appropriate for individuals who have difficulty making decisions or evaluating information. Because when that person's decision, when they can't make a decision, they can't really clearly tell you what they want in a consistent manner, that's when the agent or the guardian uses what's called the best interest standard, and they choose options or decisions, right, that would probably be considered very reasonable under the circumstances that this person finds himself in. And the important mention here is, again, best interest is done a lot for people who do not currently have competency or capacity to make decisions, including people who never had competency. So this could be a person who at birth or a very young age became disabled. They were in a car accident. They had some kind of cognitive issue that resulted in them not being able to make decisions. It's common with people who were born with developmental disabilities or who have diagnoses. However, there's also times when the loss of competency happens later in life. So multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, a brain injury, dementia. Now let's talk about the second term, which is called substituted judgment. Substituted judgment, again, I'm taking the definition from the National Guardianship Association Moral Code of Ethics. And I'm actually going to place these documents that I mentioned, that I'm referencing the NGA, National Guardianship Association. They will be on the page on my website where this Power of Attorney course resides. You may have found this video by searching on YouTube, which is great. I'm glad you're here. But know that there's a page on my website, the link will be below, where you can go to find these documents that I'm referencing. Okay? So the principle of substituted judgment means that the agent or the decision maker has to do their best to make the same decisions that this person, for whom your agent, would have made if they were able to make. So if you've known the person for a long time and you've talked about, what do you want if this happens, or what do you want if that happens, then you probably know. And it's really good to document this information, because if you ever forget, then you have it in a book or in a note, right? The other place that you could go to find out this information is to talk to their relatives, their friends, their caretakers, other people who've been involved in their life, and say, well, you've known Mary or John for their entire life. What do you think they would have wanted if this situation arose? Did they ever talk to you about, whether they wanted an extreme level of care or whether they didn't want an extreme level of care? Now, it's essential to realize that even though you're getting all this feedback from everybody, right, you still are the one that has to make that decision. You have the ultimate responsibility for making that decision on behalf of the principal. And so what you want to do is you want to gather all the information and look at it, and then make the best possible decision that you can. So let's talk about what I call the brewing storm. These are families where maybe one child was appointed or two children were appointed, and there may be jealousy, there may be disagreements, there may be, honestly, a great degree of dislike. I don't want to use the word hatred, but honestly, sometimes family members hate each other. So children may have been appointed, other children may think they're not doing a good job, other children may be jealous, there may be a lot of just crazy stuff going on, right? And honestly, this can happen. So especially if you're making decisions that your family members don't agree with, right? So again, when I was a guardian or when I was a power of attorney, I did a lot of work with family members because I was appointed instead of them, right? So immediately they had a reason to either be relieved and say, oh, thank God you're doing this, or not like me because they're like, well, why would my parents have appointed you? Why didn't they appoint me, right? So in this role of agent or guardian or conservator, whatever role you find yourself in, you have a lot of massaging to do with the egos of family members and the opinions of family members. You almost become like this person who tries to help everybody get along, right? And sometimes you got to make some really hard decisions. So what I can say is by trying to involve family members, not that they were able to make the decisions because I had to do that, but by contacting family or friends, it helped me a lot. It helped me learn about the person's habits. It helped me advocate with medical professionals, maybe who wanted me to do something totally different than what I would have done, or totally different than what that person would have wanted, which is extremely important. This is where advocacy comes in. So this can help the person, the agent, advocate with hospital and nursing home staff regarding treatments or procedures that the healthcare professionals are saying, well, we shouldn't do this, or we don't recommend this. But if it was that person's desire, even if you disagree, you're doing what the person desired, not what you think is right, or not what the healthcare professionals think is right. You're doing what that person would have wanted. And so having facts and having information supports really good decision making. It also supports somebody's ability to receive treatment. So let's say that somebody's sick and you go to the doctor and the doctor's like, well, how are they sick? And you're like, well, shoot, I don't know. Having somebody, whether it's you or a caregiver in the home or a family member, complete a daily log of, mom woke up today and she didn't feel well. Her blood pressure was high. She didn't eat. She normally goes out to exercise and she couldn't do that. All of that very detailed information, one, shows that you care enough about the person that you're caring for. And two, it's very helpful information for doctors to receive, because honestly, sometimes doctors will say, well, we never know if the patients are giving us good information. And that's the information we have to rely on. So the better the information, the more detailed, the better the outcome. Okay? So also know that as we talk about these definitions throughout this webinar, every state has their own rules and their own statutes about power of attorney and living wills and guardianship and conservatorship. So if you're working with an attorney to draw out these documents, make sure you ask to understand all this. If you're accepting that power as the agent or the guardian or the conservator, also make sure you ask what you are doing. So now that we've talked a little bit about the different types of decision-making power and advocating, we're going to talk more about the responsibilities and the duty that you have. So you never want to be the person, I always used to tell my staff this, we don't want to be the people on the front page of the newspaper. And so here's an example of a front page newspaper story. Authorities say Lee County man used power of attorney to steal from his parents. Now, you may have seen a lot of other front page newspaper stories. Let me tell you, there are plenty, right, about elder abuse from professionals and family members, because unfortunately it happens. This is not a perfect world, far from it. Now, there are also formal groups today that seek to publicize all this, right? They want to get it in the news about, family member power of abuse or fiduciary power of abuse or attorney power of abuse. Now, I will tell you that family members usually are the main abusers. Plenty of stories about conflict, and I'll share a few names. And then in the next webinar in this series, I'll go into a little detail about these stories. But you can research Casey Kasem, America's top, 100 songs, right? Peter Falk, he was an actor. Glenn Campbell, musician. Mickey Rooney, a very old and dear comedian that your parents would know. Buzz Aldrin, the astronaut. And probably one that most people would know is the whole Pat Bowlen and the story of the Denver Broncos and who was going to run that. Now, that's been solved, but those were all family disagreement issues about power of attorney or guardianship or conservatorship. And so again, in the next webinar, I'll share the scoop on those. But I wanted to just mention those names so that you know that it's not only everyday people like you and me that get into this kind of trouble. It's celebrities with millions of dollars. And probably because they have millions of dollars, there's more people interested in their money. But it can happen to anybody. It's just not relegated only to the rich and famous. So people who are appointed agent under power of attorney, guardian, or conservator have a fiduciary responsibility. And so let's begin talking about what this responsibility means and really the liabilities that you have, the risks that you're taking by accepting this appointment. We're going to talk about what a fiduciary relationship is, the duty to, again, consult family members if you don't know. We're going to talk about the NGA Standard of Care document, which again will be linked on the page on my website where this course is. Great document that I used all the time when I was a professional fiduciary. So let's do just a quick refresher on the definition of fiduciary. How many of you remember that discussion in another earlier webinar? Okay, so it's a relationship, two people, in which one person places a great degree of trust, of confidence, and reliance in another person who has that fiduciary responsibility. So know that you as a family member who is a fiduciary are just as likely, if not more, to be questioned by your family members or other people. You can be called to court just like a professional fiduciary to say, why did you make that decision? Why did you spend that money? Why didn't your mom or dad go to the hospital when they were sick? Why are you not getting them medical care? All kinds of questions. And you can't take this personally. You can't take it as an insult like, well, they don't think I'm doing my job. When you accept that fiduciary responsibility, when you accept that role as an agent, you accept other people's right and their ability to question your decision-making power. So if you're not comfortable with it, don't accept the appointment. So let's talk about what I call the duty to consult. Okay, so again, just because you have this agent title doesn't give you total and immediate control over somebody's life, right? You either act when you are asked to act. So the person says, hey, could you look into this for me? I don't know about this. Can you do this? Or you act when that person becomes what the court calls incapacitated. They have memory loss and they really can't make decisions and evaluate information. And so in normal circumstances, anything you do, you would discuss it with the principal, like mom, dad, or grandma, grandpa. Hey, we talked about this. This is what I'm going to do. What do you think about that? Are you okay with it? And you even may want to put those kind of statements in writing and have them initial to say, yeah, I am okay with this. Because you don't want these things, again, to come back with you later if your parent becomes forgetful to say, well, I never told her she could sell those stocks, or I never told her that they could sell my car, right? Because what you have to realize is the more control you have, the more potential there is for outside people to look at you and say, wow, they're abusing their powers. They're doing things that mom, dad, or grandma or grandpa would not have wanted. This is not cool. So a lot of times, aging parents are placed in care communities where they don't want to live. Bank accounts are emptied by family power of attorney. And I've personally been involved in those situations where it's happened. And so I was the person appointed to clean up the situation and make everything work, right? So when in doubt, always remember best interest, substituted judgment, reasonableness, right? Acting for somebody as if they were doing it themselves. Your job is not to control everything, but to support the wishes of the person for whom you were appointed. So let me share a couple of stories. I'm going to share one that I call independent living. So this first client was a client who lived in independent living, and they wanted the assistance of private caregivers. Now, if you know anything about independent living, even though you're in like an apartment on a campus with older people, independent living really is independent living, right? You're supposed to do everything yourself. You may live in an apartment in a senior community, but you're independent. You're doing everything, right? So my client didn't want to move to the next level, which was assisted living. But my client needed an assisted level living type of help. So needed help with taking a shower in the morning, getting dressed, sometimes going to the bathroom. She also wanted meals prepared for her. She didn't want to have to go to a dining room and pay for them, right? So for a while, we did this until the ongoing expense of the caregivers equaled the cost of the assisted living apartment. So then I had to go to my client and say, well, look at this. You're paying, more than you would be paying if you lived in assisted living. Is this really logical? Does this really make sense? I mean, I know you like your apartment here, but why not come over here where you're getting all this and you're spending less money? Now, fortunately, my client was fortunate to have the money to pay for either, right? But from a logistic standpoint, from a logical standpoint, spending more money than necessary probably wasn't a good idea. So I kept preparing budgets and I took it to my client to review because she was still in a point where she could make decisions. And as time passed, my client did come to the conclusion that yes, moving to assisted living would be a better option. Also because they had other services. They could order her medications. There were nurses and doctors that visited the assisted living community, so she didn't have to go out anymore. So it turned out to be a win-win situation, but it was a situation that over time, I had to provide enough documentation and enough reasoning so that she actually agreed to do that. And then I, as the agent, made it happen with her agreement. Story number 2, let's talk about burial wishes. And when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about prepaying cremation or prepaying a burial plan so that people don't have to rush and do this when you die. Okay. So in this situation, I had a client who lived in Denver, but had a family burial plot in another state far away. And if you've never organized this, it takes coordination between 2 funeral home providers, right? And whoever owns the cemetery, and maybe even other people if there's other agents or people involved, right? So the problem is that your power of attorney, your agent under power of attorney, ends at death. So as soon as that person dies, if you are not the personal representative of the estate, you can't do a thing, okay? Because that person is a personal rep or they could be a trustee. So what happens is if somebody doesn't do a pre-plan and pay for this and organize it all before they die, right, there could be a huge gap in the time frame between the time this person dies and there's money to pay for burial or cremation. Now, how do I know this? Well, I learned from experience. I was the trustee for a client who got sick and didn't tell me that they got sick because they thought it was going to be fine and they were going to get over it. Unfortunately, they died. And I got a phone call from the county coroner saying, Miss Wilson, I hear you're the trustee for, Mr. Jones. I'm like, yes. They're like, well, we have Mr. Jones' body here and he passed away. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So what I had to do was I needed a death certificate. I needed to go get bank accounts and all of that. So my client waited nearly 2 weeks at the coroner's office to be cremated because he didn't have a pre-plan that I could just execute. And I needed to get money to pay for things. So I used this story, not with names and all the details, with my client who had a burial plot in another state, having to explain all the difficulties and say, do you really want your body sitting in a morgue for 2 weeks or 3 weeks until the personal rep takes over? Wouldn't you just want this to go smoothly and have the service and have the burial and then, your personal rep can take effect? So through all of this, my client saw the challenges that might happen. And honestly, it took a lot of time to coordinate between 2 funeral homes and the cemetery and to get agreements in place saying that she could be buried there and that there would be transport and all of this. I mean, it took a lot of time. It probably took, honestly, more than 2 weeks to get this set up, right? So if you can imagine trying to do this after somebody dies, when you're waiting for money and you're in a rush and family's like, why isn't there a funeral? And you're like, well, I can't get all this stuff done. I mean, it's just, it's unnecessary and it's stressful, right? So in this case, my client agreed to finalize her burial plan. We paid for all the expenses. And honestly, when she passed away, everything went very smoothly. But if we hadn't done all those discussions and all the pre-planning and the discussions of the pros and cons, that wouldn't have happened. So for yourself, even for the person that you are the agent for, talk about pre-planning because it really does alleviate a lot of stress when a loved one or a family member passes away. So last, I want to talk about reasonableness and reasonable care. So anybody who is an agent under power of attorney, guardian, conservator, you're expected to use the idea of what is called reasonable care. So what is that? Well, if you think about it, day in and day out, we have all this information coming into our brains. And we have to reason and say, well, would I do this? Would I do that? Is this better? Is A better than B? Whatever. So we have to consider the consequences of our actions before we do things on the person that we're the agent for, on their family members, on their health, on their money. And so we have to think of like, what happens if we do this? What are the benefits, pros, cons, risks? What happens if it doesn't work out the way that we think? So agents, guardians, conservators are expected to exercise reasonable care when you're making decisions. And then this also relates to care planning and financial management, which we'll talk about in another webinar. But I pulled a definition of reasonable care from law.com. And I added some other definitions that I believe relate to this. Okay, so reasonable care is being cautious and concerned for the safety of yourself and of other people, and to use the normal thought processes that most people, rational people anyway, people who think and plan, would use in circumstances. And so it really is, it's subjective. Did somebody do the right thing? Did they do the wrong thing? It's almost like being on trial, right, in court, and having a jury say, well, did they do the right thing? Did they do the wrong thing? And somebody making a judgment on that, okay? But if you're diligent, if you're conscientious, if you are thorough, if you follow through, you are going to be exercising reasonable care. So let me give you another story of what reasonable care might look like. So I was a power of attorney for a man who was diagnosed with early dementia, early memory loss. And at this point, he lived alone and he was doing fine. But we brought in caregivers to just check on him, make sure he had groceries, taking his meds, all that kind of stuff. And so by using these in-home caregivers, he was able to stay at home probably a little longer than he would have been if he was living by himself, right, in that home. Now, time passes, a year passes, and all of a sudden the situation becomes like not really safe, because the caregivers would make meals and he'd say, oh, you know what, I'll eat that later. And then they would show up at dinner time and he didn't eat his lunch. Or, oh, I'll take those medications later. And then he would forget to take the medications. And then there was even a point where I would call him and say, hey, did Mary show up this morning? And he'd be like, I don't know if anybody showed up. And so I'd have to call the care agency and say, well, did the caregiver show up or not? Were they there? So my concern at this point was that I know he wanted to stay in his home. 24-hour care, extremely, extremely expensive, $20,000 a month. He couldn't afford that. So I'm having to weigh, man wants to stay at his home. Caregivers are unaffordable. What happens if he falls down the steps when the caregivers aren't there? He turns on the stove and he forgets to turn off the stove. He turns on the faucet and he forgets to turn off the faucet and the home is damaged. What if he walks out of the house and he forgets how to get back home? So making a list of all of these risks, I had no choice but to talk to him and say, you know, it's probably the time that we should move you. And at this point, he still could understand, you know, risks. But, you know, my mind was going to, oh my gosh, this is going to be a front page newspaper story if I can't convince him to move, right? And so the front page newspaper story that I imagined was, man with dementia burns to death in house, or falls downstairs and lays there for, 2 days before anybody finds him. Power of attorney knew the risks and did absolutely nothing. That is not the story that you want on the front page of the newspaper if you are that agent or that guardian or that power of attorney. And I will tell you it happens because people are afraid to make hard decisions. So I had discussion after discussion with him, did my best to reason with the amount of memory that he still has. Now, my client, fortunately, was a school teacher, right? So he was able to understand his duty to the students, right? To teach them and to be an example of a good person and all of that. And I said, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't exercise the same concern you did as a teacher. In this case, you're like my student, and I have to do the best for you, and I have to ensure your safety and your well-being. And so moving you really is the best thing. And he agreed, and we moved him, right? But again, I involved him in that whole process. I shared a lot of reasoning. I spent a lot of time talking to him about it because I just didn't want to do it against his will. And sometimes there are times when you will have to do that. I will share other stories in other webinars. But so a really good professional guideline that is on my website on this Power of Attorney page that you can find is called the NGA Standards of Practice, National Guardianship Association Standards of Practice. So these guidelines can offer ideas about the responsibilities, decision-making standards that relate to accepting this role as a fiduciary and as an agent. Now, the document, you may look at it and you're like, oh my God, this is way over my head. It's overwhelming. I explain a lot of it in these webinars in very simple terms. So if you don't want to read it, that's fine. Just watch all these webinars thoroughly and then rewatch them. But honestly, it's one of the best guidelines out there to make sure that if you are this agent or fiduciary, that you understand everything you're supposed to do, all the duties, and how to carry through with those duties. Now, you may look at this and you may say, holy schmoly, I don't want to be this agent. I don't want this responsibility. I don't want liability. I don't want people accusing me. Well, that's okay, because I'll put the link to the National Guardianship Association again on that page. There you can go and you can find professional fiduciaries to take your place as successor. Because what happens is family members or friends or anybody accepts these positions, and then over time when it becomes really time consuming, or people don't know how to manage money, or they are afraid of making medical decisions, people are like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm done. This is too much for me. I have a life. I can't spend 24 hours a day doing this, right? So that's when you can find successor agents, sometimes by asking attorneys who drafted the documents on the National Guardianship Association website. Sometimes you can call the elder law section of your state bar association to find out who does this. Sometimes, believe it or not, even contacting Adult Protective Services, because I used to get a lot of referrals to them or from them. So we've come to the end of this section. I know it's a lot of information. I'm Pamela D Wilson. I'm a caregiving expert of 20 years. Please do like, follow my channel on YouTube, and comment so that other people who are looking for hope, help, and support on this topic or on any caregiving topic, I have over 800 videos here, can find their way here. Your participation and your support is really essential to helping other people. Now, if you have questions or comments about this video, post them below. I will respond. I look at these every day. You can also join my private Facebook group. It's called the Caregiving Trap, where you can learn from caregivers in similar situations. There's amazing people there from all over the world, all walks of life, all caregiving situations. You can also go to my website. It's PamelaDWilson.com. Find the Contact Me page, fill out a form, and request a personal consultation. I thank you so much for being here. I'm sending you love, light, and a lot of hope until we see each other again in the next webinar, in this series, or in another video. I'll see you again soon.